Hello, Salt Strong Nation. Joe Simons, like Diamond's back again. Got my good friend Pat Ogletree. What's up, Pat?
What's up, Joe? How you doing today?
Excellent. We're talking about how to catch fish fast, even if you don't get to fish as often as you would like. And I'm going to say maybe once a month if you're lucky. There's a lot of people like that. And we've gone to a lot of these chapter meetings. We were just talking about that offline. Salt Strong now has, gosh, 25, 26 chapters where they're meeting every single month and talking about life, talking about local tips. They're bringing local guides and experts and even marine biologists in to talk about cool things, getting to meet good friends, having some food together, raffles. It's really, really fun. And every time I go to these meetings, I ask them a couple things. I like to know, how did you find out about Salt Strong? I'm always just curious how people find us, whether it's podcast or YouTube or Facebook or a friend, whatever. And the other thing I ask is, when was your last fishing trip? And like, how often you go fishing and fish out of a boat? I'm always just curious about a lot of that stuff. And it's really, really interesting. And I know it's worse in the winter, which we're just, kind of at the tail end, depending on where you live. But I feel like every time I ask that question, Pat, it's almost like a deer in the headlights where they have to really think about it. When I say, hey, when was the last time you went fishing? They're like, oh man, it's been a couple months. So I think in general, most of us don't get to fish as much as we like. I think you and I work for a fishing company. We don't get to fish as much as we would like. And this is your recent story, which is why we're talking about it. But know that if you're not fishing as much as you would like, you're not alone. So you're not abnormal. And even if you're only fishing once or twice a quarter, that seems to be somewhat typical of the average angler out there. So knowing that, that means your time is really valuable. If you only get to fish, let's just say once a quarter, even once a month, if you're lucky, how do we maximize that time? Now, Pat's really unique. He actually went in the RV, he and his wife did, and went from, Florida to Texas and then back up to Virginia and down again and fished the entire way using our lures, our techniques, and documented the whole thing. It's fascinating. It's amazing. I know Pat learned a ton. So one, he's got a lot of experience in a lot of different places, but two, he just had a massive truck issue. And I know we don't want to talk too much about it because it's painful, but essentially didn't get to fish for, the first 30 plus days of the year as a paid fishing coach, which I know he's frustrated and obviously just anxious to get out there. And so he had to go over 30 days. We'll kind of get in the details here in a second of not fishing at all, and then had to go out there and make sure that next trip absolutely counted. I mean, he had cameras on him. He had to catch fish and had not been on the water, near the water, in over 30 days. So here's the story, and we're going to talk about lessons learned there and how you can recreate that as well. When you do have that hall pass, finally, you finally get to go fishing. You're like, I just want to catch a ton of fish and put the smackdown on them. So what happened there, Pat? And how did you get through it all?
So, it was one of those situations where my wife and I we only have one vehicle. My wife doesn't work, and I do this, so to save money, we have one vehicle, which is fine. We've been this way for a long time. The only issue is, when things break down. Typically, if you have a repair on your vehicle, it's a day or two, no big deal. You can Uber back and forth, not a huge deal. Well, my truck needed major repairs, and there's a part shortage, and one thing just kind of compounded, and it wound up me being off the water for 32 days. That is the longest stretch of time I have been off the water in a decade, at least. And yeah, to say I was going stir crazy is that's not even part of it. I was actually to the point where, as a fishing coach, one of my responsibilities is, I'm in here editing videos and doing things. So that's what I do during the day. And then, when I got that done at the end of the day, I was literally in my backyard casting just so I could have a rod and reel in my hand so I didn't forget what that felt like. And it was a long stretch. But here's what's funny is I remember not too long ago when I was just starting out with inshore saltwater fishing. This is kind of what I did. I was that person that only got to fish maybe once a month, maybe once every 6 weeks because I had a lot of other responsibilities. Had younger kids that were in school and running them back and forth to different activities, and of course, Joe, you know how it is when you have those kids at that certain age. You can't, all of them are in after school activities. All of them have something, between marching band and karate and dance and, all that. So, all that adds up. So it really subtracts the amount of time that you're able to get out on the water. So one of the things that, when you get back out on the water, you don't want to have a bad day. It is great just to get out there and be out on the water, but that cherry on top is actually catching some fish. So, one of the things that really is the game changer, I hate to use that term because it's so used out, but one of those things that really helps a lot is having that network and being in touch. So, being a Salt Strong coach, I'm in the community a lot. I'm listening to posts and reports, and I'm kind of, as a third party, watching what these fish are doing and kind of seeing what those trends are. And I was able to have an idea when I got back out on the water what these fish were going to do. So not only was I not on the water for 32 days, that's when we had that epic cold front that came through. The
Hmm.
first time or the last time I had went fishing, it was, almost 70 degrees. It was really nice out. It was a little windy that day, but it wasn't bad at all. We had snow in Galveston. We had snow in Pensacola. It
Yep.
all that weather change. And these fish were not going to be in the same place they were the last time I was out on that water. So luckily, staying, in touch with the community and reading the reports that's going on, I was able to kind of follow where these fish were going and where they were going to be. So it just boiled down to being able to get out on the water and eliminating those spots that I knew they weren't going to be in, and trying to find those spots, that 90-10 zone, as we say, where the feeding fish are going to be. And it wound up, it took me a little bit, but I was able to find the fish and pattern them out. And being off the water for 32 days, I was still able to find fish my first trip out.
Let's talk about the actual trip. So where did you start first? Like I'm not looking for like a GPS spot. What type of spot and depth were you starting with? And it sounds like maybe that didn't work. And where did you go next?
So yeah, what I did was I will say I was fishing the Mosquito Lagoon in East Central Florida, and we were in winter patterns for the most part at that time. So I knew we're looking for typical winter patterns, and for redfish, specifically, we're looking for soft muddy bottoms. We're looking for wind protection. We're looking for something that's got some depth change. So I had an idea of where that was going to be. So I started fishing along the ICW, the intercoastal. But here's the difference was we were on a little bit of a warming trend. So these fish had actually moved a little bit. And that's something that I had to, adapt when I was out there. So I had a game plan, and I started working that game plan, but not noticing any life in those type of areas. Then I reverted back to, I kind of went 180 and started going to a different type of area. And sure enough, that's where I found the fish. And now winter patterns are typically, these fish are grouped up, and you might have to cover some ground. But once you find those fish, there's going to be a lot of fish in that same area, and that's exactly what had happened. So, that is part of the process. The part of the process is coming up with a game plan, but also knowing when to, adapt from that game plan and go to something else.
Always have a plan B. So, did you start looking for bait? I'm trying to get in your mind
Mhm.
on, I think a lot of people get out there, they hadn't fished in, let's just say 30 days, 60 days, 90 days. You get out there, and the thought you had in your head of where you're going to find fish is broken. There's no fish there. There's no signs of life. There's no bait. Well, what do you do next besides not freak out?
Yeah, that every time I hit the water, I'm looking for signs of life. That is number one. I'm looking for bait. I'm looking for birds. I'm looking for anything that is attracting my attention, because I'm looking for the same thing that those, the predator fish are looking for, and that's any other types of signs of life. And that's what clued me in on, hey, this isn't working, because the area that I had picked out, it was lifeless. There was nothing going on there. And a lot of times, when that happens, I'm going to make that swing, and we're going to go in a totally different direction and try to find, something that's, on the other end of the spectrum. So I was fishing deep drop-offs, wasn't seeing any signs of life. So I went to find some really shallow wind protected shorelines that had that muddy bottom, and that's where the fish were. So I had to make that swing. But finding bait is really, it's really important right now. And the good thing about wintertime is, during the warmer months, during spring, summer, fall, there's bait everywhere. And what happens is the fish have a tendency to spread out a little bit. So they feed a little bit better, during those times, but they will spread out. So you're kind of spot hopping. You're going from spot to spot to spot once you identify the types of locations they are. Now in the wintertime, it's kind of different. What happens is you're going to cover a lot of ground. And as we said before, those fish are going to be all in one location. And when you find them, they're going to be grouped up together. There's not as much bait. So when you do find the bait, that's typically where you're going to find the fish. So we're not looking for acres of bait. We're just looking for the most concentration, and it's typically going to be in a small area because there's not that much bait around.
That's great. Yeah, I was you'd mentioned the community that's the insider community where it's essentially our network where I'm in there every day, you're in there every day. Just I'm learning, I'm sharing, helping, and I do think that's such a unique advantage, right? It's a different one. It's one that's not talked about a lot. It's I mean it's how all the pros do it, right? If you're on the tournament circuit, whether it's bass fishing or redfish, I mean it's all about your network. I remember C. Richardson, we were fishing with him one time, and he used to do tournaments pretty hardcore. I mean, he was up in Louisiana and Texas. Like, I asked him a similar question, like, how did you figure it out? you know, he lives in Florida and all of a sudden having to go compete in Louisiana and Texas. He's like, you're only as good as your network. First thing out of his mouth. He's like, I have a network of other captains and guides that I'll do the same for them when they're down here. And we just help each other out. Not necessarily GPS spots, but the trends, right? It's, hey, I'm seeing people catching fish in the super shallow water. They're all piled up around schools of mullet. Oh, cool. I'm going to go recreate that in my area. And I think that community, that networked effect is incredibly powerful. How often do you use that?
When it comes to going in the community, thankfully, because, again, part of my responsibility being a coach, I'm in the community a lot, and I'm not in there just, one of the things, I like to do is help people that have questions. You can answer that question, but I'm also reading reports. Trust me, I'm in there
Yeah.
learning just like the next person. And, like you said, it's not necessarily about those GPS spots. You'll pick up little tidbits out of each one of these reports. And what a lot of people don't realize, and I try to stress this even within the community, is you don't have to be looking for trends that are in your zip code. Don't necessarily look for the trends that are right in your area. Sometimes what happens is, trends that are on the other side of the state or even, as far away as South Texas will actually coincide to where we are in Florida because their summer and their spring is lined up kind of about that same thing. So I see what they're doing over in Corpus Christi and see how the fish are acting over there. A lot of times that's about a 2 week precursor to how these fish are going to act here in Florida. So I'm looking, all over the place in the community. And sometimes what happens is I'll see a report, say it's up in North Carolina, but I'm seeing how they rig something or I'm seeing how they might have, been fishing a certain way. And that just kind of, it reminds me of something or something I don't even think about. And it's something that I could apply. And I'm looking for, solutions to the problems that I have. And oftentimes you can find them where you're not looking. So always go in there and read those reports. There's just such good information in there.
That's great. What other advice do you have for the angler listening or watching that doesn't get to fish often and has maybe struggled the last couple times and they're like, I need to have a good trip. What else you got?
One of the things that, us as, coaches and here at Salt Strong, we absolutely, we all like using artificial lures. Live bait can be great. The issue that we have with live bait, especially in the wintertime, is these fish are not moving around. And live bait can be very good if you know where the fish are. One of the things that I recommend that people do whenever they don't get to fish that often is get to learn artificial lures. Learn how to use just a couple of them. I just did a video on, throwing our 2.0, which is our 3.5 inch paddle tail, and the Prawn Junior, which is our 3.5 inch shrimp imitation. And the reason why I like artificial lures for people that don't fish that often is because it forces you to go find those fish. A live bait, again, not saying that live bait doesn't work. It absolutely does. But if you're not on the water every single day and you're knowing where those fish are moving in the direction that they're going, you could be at a disadvantage because you're parking for 2 or 3 hours waiting for something to happen that's not going to happen. Whereas if you're actively fishing with artificial lures, you're covering ground and then you can start eliminating that negative water. And that's one of the things that I'm always out there. I say we're looking for bait, we're looking for signs of life, we're looking for birds, I even look for stingrays. I think stingrays are a good sign because they're scavengers just like redfish and black drum can be. And a lot of times you will see stingrays, with, where redfish are. And, these, again, just I'm looking for signs of life. But what happens is I'm also eliminating where these fish are not. And by doing that, I can start seeing, like this trip that I just did where I'd been off the water for a while, I can tell that there was no signs of life on the deeper edge. So I didn't need to keep on going and looking at all the other deeper edges. It's probably going to be the same. So you make that swing and you make that change. I've eliminated that type of structure. Now I'm going to go look for this type of structure. And then when I find that, then if there's like a pot of fish here, then I can typically take that same type of structure. I actually pulled up my Smart Fishing Spots app and I started looking at other islands that were around the area, looking for that other type of structure. And then what you can do is you can set up 4 or 5 different other spots that you can start looking at. And usually, a handful of those, a couple of those will actually turn out having more fish. And that's another little tip that I'll say. Just because you find fish doesn't necessarily mean they're going to be in a feeding mood. And you don't have to sit there and wait them out. You can dissect that area. Pay attention to what it is. Is there wind protection? What's the depth? Is there, depth changes around there? Kind of, figure out what that area is. And again, look at your satellite images. Try to find something else, or maybe you know the area really well and you already know areas like that. And then go to those areas and bounce around. Not only are you going to find more fish, sometimes you're going to find those fish that are actually willing to eat, and then you can go back to those other fish, and maybe then when you go to see them again, that they're actually feeding too. A lot of mistakes that people make is they'll sit there and sit on top of fish that just are not feeding.
No, I think that's great. Something you said that I want to make sure everyone heard was when you're looking at spots, let's just assume you're on a map or your phone, like a Smart Fishing Spots app. The 90-10 zone, there's two ways to get there. One is to just try to pinpoint where the fish are. The other one, which I believe is smarter and was a big aha moment for me when I first heard it, was to start eliminating, process of elimination first. Because it can be intimidating, right? And I'm even, as I'm filming this, I'm looking out on a lake that I fish quite a bit. It's a pretty big lake, 1,000 acres. It's a lot of, I mean, compared to the ocean, it's small, but 1,000 acres is still 1,000 acres. That's a lot of area to fish to figure out where they are. And instead of just like getting overwhelmed by it and say, I'm just going to keep trying spots, you look at a map and just by a couple simple filters, I'd say 1 foot contour lines. You mentioned that because you can see where the depth changes are. You can see structure, docks, oyster beds, through our app as well. Maybe that 3D, like that underwater shade relief, if you just had those two on, you're already going to know where the points are. So that's pretty easy. And then everything else you can just start eliminating. Like, all right, I know they're not out here. They're not going to be way out here in the middle. There's zero structure here. It's just all sand. They're not going to be here. And you start looking and you're like, wait a minute, there's not that many spots that could be left. Like this, it's not as intimidating. And I remember that first time I did that, it was such an aha moment. And I was like, wow, it was a huge body of water. And I just shrunk that thing down. Still means I got to put a little work in. I still got to go fish it and make sure that I'm doing the on the water stuff, right? Like looking for bait and birds, etc. But man, it's such a game changer when you go out with that confidence to say, you know what, they can only be in these 10 spots versus 10,000 spots. Is there anything else that you use on like Smart Fishing Spots, any other filters to try to eliminate some of those dead zones before you even hit the water?
Yeah, there's a couple things, but something I want to hit on, that you had mentioned, and earlier we were talking about in the warmer months these fish are going to spread out because the bait spreads out. Well, guess what? There's still a 90-10 zone, and you're still eliminating water because a lot of times what happens is these fish are going to be on outside points. So even though you have a mile of shoreline, there might only be 4 or 5 points along that mile. You can go from point to point to point, and that way you're in those zones that these fish are going to be in. There's no reason for you to go to fish those wind protected shorelines in the summertime because they're not going to be there. And same thing in the wintertime for the most part. There's going to be some variations in there. You can look for wind protection, stay out of those wind blown areas, and again, you're eliminating water. Now, when it comes to other features on the Smart Fishing Spots, there are a couple things that I do use. Now, You had mentioned that I traveled in the RV. So that is something I live full time in an RV and I traveled everywhere from South Texas all the way up to Virginia. And the Smart Fishing Spots app helped me in areas that I've never been to before. So for 2 years, on top of that, I pretty much never launched in the same area twice. I never fished the same area twice. So if I was in North Carolina, one day I'm fishing at this ramp, one day I might fish that same ramp, but I head the other direction. So I'm never fishing the same area. So I never really got to dial in, a spot. I was always looking for, I was on the, always looking for fish. Now, when I first hit the road, we didn't have smart fishing spots. This was something that came out later. But now,
We did it for
hitting the
you,
road, if
Pat.
I
We
go
did
to,
it for you on your trip. How
thank
can
you.
we help Pat out?
It helped out a lot. But that's one thing that I can do is I can actually look at the Smart Fishing Spots app and it does a really good job of, being able to show you some areas where the fish are going to be. And this is really vital to somebody that's new to fishing, or maybe the intermediate angler, maybe somebody that had only, spot to spot to spot, instead of fishing techniques and trends, they go to a handful of spots. And if that's not producing, then they're not going to catch fish that day. This is something else that will show you areas that are likely to hold fish. Now, as we said earlier, there's no guarantees that there's going to be fish in these smart fishing spots because the one thing that the app can't do is look for bait. So that's why it's great to, pick out a handful of these spots, pick out 4 or 5, 6 of these spots, and more than likely one of those is going to have the bait and it's going to have the fish you're looking for. So that's one of the things that helps me out in brand new areas I've never been to before.
I love it. Anything else that you want to share on that Texas to Virginia trip? I think we don't talk about that enough because that was such a cool experience. Like you never did you get skunked? I know you had a couple bad ones, a couple bad days. But in general, I mean, you caught fish in every single state and in most of these cities you stopped at. It was
Mhm.
amazing.
Yeah,
And
so
all lures, did you
yeah,
use live bait at all?
yeah, I think I've used live bait or cut bait probably maybe 5 times in the past 10 years. It's just something
Wow.
I'm an artificial only guy. I don't fish live bait. And again, not saying it doesn't work. This is just, what I do. And when I went to each one of the states or each one of the cities within the states, I've been pretty much all over Texas. I've been, anywhere over the Gulf and all up and down the eastern seaboard. My goal was to catch a redfish under my own, guide. I'm the one that finds the fish. So
Yeah.
I didn't go out with a guide. I didn't go out with the, other insiders. I didn't, look for anybody else's spots. I went on the map. I dissected the area and picked out spots. And that first year, I went to 8 different states and I caught fish in every single one of those states. I caught redfish specifically. That was what I wanted to catch a redfish. There were tough days. I'm not going to lie to you because what happens is there's little nuances. Every little place has their own little nuance. But as a whole, redfish, trout, flounder, they all kind of act the same way. But words like shallow and deep and warm and cold, now those are subjective terms that are going to be different. So deep water in Georgia is a whole different terminology than deep water in the Mosquito Lagoon. And in my home waters in the Mosquito Lagoon, deep could be 3 to 4 feet. Normally I'm fishing in knee deep or less water. So me saying deep in the Mosquito Lagoon is 4 feet, but deep in Georgia could be 20 feet. It's a completely different thing. But once you start learning that, these fish really, they act the same. Again, there's going to be variances with those numbers and what that is. But a redfish can be caught using the same techniques that I do here in Florida. That is in South Texas. I go to the Laguna Madre. I go to South Bay down there. I could drop you in the middle of South Bay, Texas, and it looks like the Mosquito Lagoon mangrove tree lines and it fishes almost exactly the same way too. So that's one of the big things that I learned. Um, Another thing that I learned when I go out there, people a common question, what's your favorite place to fish? Every single state that I went to had this kind of their own magical little place that I went to. There's so much good fishing out there. And I go to a place and talk to the locals and they'd ask me where I'm from. I'm from Florida. Oh, why'd you leave Florida? The fishing's so good there. I'm like, you don't know how good you have it here. I mean, it's I look at that and I'm like, this is great. I mean, yeah, there's so many people that fish down here in Florida. And you see, everybody's holding the fish in the social media and all that stuff, but there's its own challenges there. But every state I went to has got its great places, and you'd be surprised. I mean, there's so many good places in the United States to fish.
Yeah. And if you guys, this is for members only. If you want to go see all of Pat's, I mean, he documented this whole thing. So it's all on video, every single one of these trips. It's all, actually, you can find it in the app, in Smart Fishing Spots app. There's a layer that actually says Insider Reports and spot dissections too, because I know he
Mhm.
dissected some of the areas as well. And it's all right there. Desktop, mobile, doesn't matter. Or if you're just in the community, you can go look, search for Pat Ogletree, Insider Reports, and spot dissections. You'll see all of those there. Super helpful. And you mentioned something too about don't just look at the reports that are right there in your zip code. You can learn a lot from even other states. Same with those spot dissections. We put out so much content, it's tough for me to watch every single video. You know, the first, I think, 7 years, I literally watched every single thing we ever put out. I learned so much from some of those spot dissections that weren't even in Florida. There were other places, just in terms of how you and Luke and Tony think about finding fish and how you dissect maps and how you do the 90-10, how you eliminate areas. It's fascinating. And just watching those videos alone, well worth it. So those are called the spot dissections. If you're an insider member, you have access to all of them. It's all right there and incredibly helpful. We'll still put up new ones. There's, I mean,
Mhm.
hundreds and hundreds of them in every major city and area in basically the Southeast. I'm going to say Southeast Texas to heck, we even have them up in New Jersey, up
Yeah.
past, yeah. So we have them everywhere. So up
Yeah,
even,
and I was just, I didn't mean to cut you off on
yeah,
that,
no.
but one thing that's great about these spot dissections, and this is where I think the magic happens, is when you start learning your area and you start learning how the fish move in your area. Everything becomes simpler. I think
Mhm.
what happens is when we go through those stages of becoming a beginning to intermediate to an advanced angler, everything changes a little bit. And I think what happens is that crossover from going from an intermediate to an advanced angler is when you stop having belief that the lure is doing all the work. So whenever you start believing in your own fishing skills, and when you get to an area that you've got a handful of lures that you're a master in, if you will, and you know which one that you're going to use to catch those fish. I think what happens is a lot of people, going from that beginning to intermediate stage, they start filling up their tackle box. They start bringing way too much with them, and again, that's that belief that that next lure, that next color, that next whatever is going to be what catches the fish. When your advanced anglers, your professional fishing guides, your tournament anglers, they are masters of just a handful of lures. They know what they're good at. They know that they can, fish this lure in this situation and catch the fish. And the reason, I said all this is not only did I, go from all of these different areas, I primarily fished two lures. That was the 2.0 that we talked about earlier, that 3.5 inch paddle tail, and that was the Prawn Junior. It was very rare that I used something other than those two lures. And it was only two colors. I used the Gold Digger and I used the Slam Shady. And, I could literally bring four lures with me, two of those 2.0s, two of those Prawn Juniors, a couple different ways to rig them, and I can catch fish anywhere in the country because I got to know those lures and when they worked well and how they worked. And that's way more important than having just a ton of tackle out there. Get to know your area, get to know the way that the fish you're after, how they behave, and also how the bait behaves, because the fish are going to follow the bait. If you master where the bait is coming from and how it's going to act, more than likely you're going to be able to find where those fish are.
Cool. Love it, man. This is so helpful. Well, if you guys want more access to Pat, he is over there in the community. That's community.saltstrong.com. We also do live Q&A every Thursday for this is
Mhm.
once again all friends, insider members, completely free. It's just part of the membership. So take advantage of that. You can even submit questions beforehand if you're not going to be able to make it. But it's such a game changer. And if you're struggling at all or just worried about that next trip because you haven't been on the water, get in there. I mean, literally, Pat just said, "This is what I did." I was in the community just looking at trends, listening to what's happening, and it is such a time saver when you have that intel and even going to a chapter meeting. We have these chapters, as I mentioned in the very beginning of the show. A great place to meet people. There are always going to be, out of a group of 50 to 80 people, someone who has fished in the last couple of days and then say, "Hey, here's exactly where I was catching fish." It's amazing just how helpful people are at these chapter events. So Anything else, Pat, to end it on?
Yeah, actually, I do want to talk about, we got some new technology out there in our Smart Fishing Spots app that'll, these things are, one thing about Salt Strong, I will say, we listen to our insider members, and if there's a way we can make something happen, there is. We've got a couple different layers that are is in our Smart Fishing Spots. One is water temperature layer. That's a huge deal, especially this time of year.
Yeah,
And it's about those trends, whether it's a rising water temperature or falling water temperature, the trends are going to dictate the direction that those fish are going to go. And the other one is the AI game plan. I don't know if we've officially announced that we have that, but the AI game plan, it's literally in this again, it's going to be somebody that if you are new to fishing or if you are an intermediate angler, somebody that's struggling, it's literally you select the smart fishing spot, you select AI game plan, and it comes up with a game plan for you. And the times that I've used it now, I'll be honest with you, I haven't used it yet to totally, plan my trips, but I did have a really, really good trip, and I came back there just to see what AI would say. It kind of nailed it.
that's cool.
It
I
did,
love
it
it.
did pretty good.
Yeah, I mean, I use that analogy. It's like having a fishing guide and speed dial in your back pocket, right? I mean, it really is like, hey, how should I fish this area? And like, oh, well, here's the wind's coming from this way, and there's some oysters nearby, and use one of these two lures, and this is the depth. Here's what to expect. Here's how to position. It's kind of everything you need. So pretty cool. Awesome. Well, Pat, thank you so much. Thank you all for sticking around. If you have any questions, comment down below, assuming you're watching this or on the blog. If you're on iTunes or Stitcher, any of those, please leave a review, subscribe. It helps us out big time. And once again, go to community.saltstrong.com. We're all over there. It's incredibly helpful. There are so many things you can learn on the trends. There are so many new things like new layers that Pat just mentioned. We've got new tackle coming out constantly, and that's where we're getting all the feedback is in the community. So please, please, please go over there. And heck, we give away like $1,500 of free stuff every month just for being active in there. No cost to enter. It's just for being active. You're automatically entered. So go over there to community.saltstrong.com. And if you're not a member, what the heck are you waiting on? Come join us and almost 60,000 others. And I hope to see you inside the club. And that's all at saltstrong.com. I appreciate you, Pat. And I will talk to you guys on the next episode.